This is Family Justice Denied with Clint Doran and myself, Joan Kloth-Zanard. As you know, we do a weekly debate discussion on various areas where we feel there is family justice not being appropriately addressed. So, Clint, take it away.
So, we've been doing the show for a little while now, and last week we were on our webinar channel and we had somebody come in that's dealing with a case that's an international case. And, me and Joni talked about it. It's something that a lot of parents deal with in cases, but you hardly ever hear about it or what their options are, what protections they have, what assistance they can get. So what we decided was we were going to do one on what's called the Hague Conventions, which is what a parent can do internationally if their child is absconded to another country. Um, so
So,
in doing
people
research, go ahead.
to understand the Hague, think of it as like this body of international countries that are all supposed to share and cooperate with each other. Not all countries will abide by the Hague, if you will, contract or constitution. Some of them aren't part of it, but those that are will work with another country if there's an issue such as kidnapping or working with their government on another issue that crosses over to that country's borders. Clint?
Well, here's the thing. When we talk Hague Convention, first off, you got to understand that, okay, is that the Hague Convention has actually been around since the 1890s, 1907. So there are multiple levels to this Hague Convention. But what we're talking about, 1980s Hague Convention, which governs child custody, child kidnapping, and stuff like this. Uh, so first off, understand that there are 100 countries that have signed onto this convention. Now, when you pull it up, and it's spelled Hague, when you pull it up, basically you're going to get generic information about it, kind of give you little descriptions. But basically what it will tell you is this. This convention focuses on protecting children from wrongful international removal or retention by ensuring their prompt return to their country of habitual residence. It doesn't decide custody. It has nothing to do with who gets custody. That is the sole jurisdiction of the country the case is in. Now, Joni, you know this as well, I'm assuming, is that when a parent deals with a child being kidnapped to another country, um, what they go kind of crazy and they don't know where to go. Well, the answer to that is what they call a central authority, which is usually your State Department.
And your State Department is then supposed to broker stuff with The Hague on your behalf. Now, I want to clarify because Clinton and I talked about this yesterday. Do we use the word kidnapping? Do we use the word custodial interference? Do we use the word parental kidnapping? We're not sure where or what is a really acceptable terminology here. Is it an abduction? Isn't it? Both parents, in most cases, both parents have custody, but the one parent has removed the child from the country of origin where the case is, making it very difficult for the parent that's still in that country to even have a relationship with their child in the new country. Oftentimes, for example, I know of a case where the father won his criminal case wherein he had been falsely accused of sexually abusing his child, and it was determined unanimously that it absolutely never happened, that the mother had lied. He then went into family court and got sole custody. But before he gets sole custody, the mother kidnapped or took the child and brought them to Costa Rica. Costa Rica is to honor the court decisions of the United States that not only not only determined that the father was innocent in all the criminal allegations, that the mother had lied, but that he has sole custody. So this is an example where the Hague isn't really working, and the parent has had to resort to other ways of trying to get through to Costa Rica to understand and to get his child back.
Well, I think it's also important to comprehend that when you talk about the Hague, it is a process that has to be done. So the basic steps is your State Department will get a hold of the country, explain the situation. They'll have a legal hearing over there, state, seeing is this valid, what's going on. And they try to do this within a 6-week time frame for most countries. And then they'll make a decision. Now the key aspect here is this is simply for the return of the children, not the other parent. Very few countries will actually send the other parent back with the children when these cases happen, because hey, they
That's not
didn't
part of
break
the
any
Hague.
laws in their country. They're good. It's a private matter. So it's just for the
So, as Clint was saying, the Hague isn't meant or forcing a parent back to the originating country. That would only occur if through the FBI or the CIA or through a international agency to the other country's international agency, and it would only be predicated on criminal behavior of some sort that necessitated the two countries to swap out or return whoever the party was. So for example, let's say there was a case in the United States where the parent was convicted of custodial interference. This is a felony. If that parent took the child out of the state, that makes it a federal issue from state to state. If they take them out of the country, it now escalates it to an international level and must go to an international agency within the United States and within that other country to
And another thing, Joan, it's very important to understand that they only have 1 year from the time that the parent actually took the children out of the country to do anything. After the 1 year time frame, they just let it go.
I'm not sure they let it go. The key here is
it's
called a statute of limitations. So you have 1 year to file, but that doesn't preclude that it could take you 5 or 6 years to get the child back.
Yeah.
As in the case of the case that I mentioned earlier with the father whose child was taken to Costa Rica, he immediately filed. But that's still, I'm not even sure, but I would think the case is still ongoing because Costa Rica refused to abide by and accept the U.S. court decisions on the custody of the child.
Yeah, I mean, one of the most famous cases when we talk about this is happened in the early 90s. It was the United States and Brazil, and that case went on for the father. So it's important to understand, for parents to understand, that when they deal with this, it's not something the U.S. decides. It's something that country decides that the children are in.
Right. Excuse me.
So, and the thing about it is we're hearing more and more of this slowly over time, that parents, even U.S. citizens, are taking their children to other countries thinking that, hey, I'm in another country, the U.S. can't touch me, the parent can't touch me, and there are agencies that if the State Department can't get anything done for you, there are agencies that have come up overnight that you can hire that will literally go to this country and, for lack of a better word, kidnap your children back.
That's interesting. I got a good question on that one. Okay, so have official authority from the country of origin that allows them to go and retrieve the child or children?
No. These are private companies.
In private
They're,
investigators.
I'm thinking the term, not private investigators, they're private recovery, children recovery agents is what they're called. And these are private companies, no government affiliations or anything. They actually, most of them are a lot of ex-military, ex-law enforcement that will actually go to a country, uh, observe, find an opportunity, grab the children, and bring them back through private channels. You know, they're not going to get on a Delta airline and bring them back, but they'll get on a private plane and they will transport them back to the United States. Usually these things are very expensive when you reach out to these individuals. You know, we both know Catherine McWillie has some experience in some of those cases. Um, she would be great to get on the show later on and talk about and continue talking about that aspect. Um, because I mean they've made TV shows, TV movies on this very subject matter. You know, it's not good for the children in any case when this stuff happens. You know, but then we also have to look at the Hague also considers if there's allegations of domestic violence, child abuse. You know, they have to take in everything that they're handed and they review it. So they could still not order the children back if they believe there is valid domestic violence by their standard, not the United States standard, but by their standards. And then when you talk about their standards, you look at cultural differences, societal aspects in the country. It's not like going to the courts here in the United States a lot of times.
No, there are definite differences. And to your answer about these agencies, I kind of did a quick AI, and it came up with the following: international child recovery specialists, parental custody recovery agents, NGOs or non-government organizations and charities that will do this, and also Interpol and law enforcement that are international police agencies. These are people that will go in and do child recovery specialist or international child locator. And there's obviously the
Well,
Hague Convention is supposed to be the mechanism that is
if
supposed to
my memories,
coordinate child returns.
if my memory serves me correctly, Joan, because you mentioned Interpol, Interpol will only intercede if it's found legal kidnapping. International kidnapping is the only one where Interpol will intercede because they are still a law enforcement agency, so they're bound by, you know.
Okay, so say that term again.
Which
Quantify.
term?
Because I'm asking, what quantifies the use of Interpol in a child abduction? Let's see what that says. What quantifies? Great question. The case must cross international borders. Interpol only gets involved when a child has been taken to or maybe in a different country from where they were abducted and where custody was established. It's got serious urgency, domestic remedies, exhausted, etc. There's other things here, but that's basically what
and that's why we had that discussion is we have to be careful with that term kidnapping because if a custody decision hasn't been made, then it's not technically under the guise of kidnapping.
Right. It's not custodial interference if if one parent still has sole custody and the other one has none. The parent with no custody, it's not custodial interference because they don't have custody. But if there is any level of custody involved where whether one parent has 70% and one is 30, or it's 50-50 or 60-40, then it becomes a form of custodial interference, parental kidnapping, parental abduction, whatever term you want to whatever term your country uses.
Okay, let's use this case as a hypothetical. Is two people go to court, they file divorce papers. One parent takes the children without the other parent's knowledge or approval to, let's say, Russia. Is it parental kidnapping? Is it parental custodial interference? Which one would you guide
Wait,
that
say
under?
again. What was the custody for the case?
There is no custody. They filed for divorce. Custody
But
hasn't
they
been
hadn't,
set
hadn't
one
been
way or the
decided.
other.
Then, okay, by law, custody set. The standard is supposed to be 50-50 custody because you have parental rights. If you, so long as you have not been adjudicated as an unfit parent, your parental rights still stand. And because you're even though you're separated and getting divorced, if there is no custody order, they can't take the children and say one parent has more custody than the other yet. They can only do that by a court of law, and since
But
no
that's
court of
but
law
that's what I'm
has
getting
made
at.
that,
So
it would be custodial interference.
see, I don't see that as custodial. I mean, logically, it's custodial interference. But
Custodial
I'm talking
interference.
terminology. I'm talking legal aspects of it.
The
Is
legal
I
aspect
don't
is
see it as
because
custodial interference because custody has not been set in any judiciary.
no, custody is set already because you were married and had children together under that premise. You have 50-50 custody. You
That's only in
automatically,
states. That's only in states that already have legislation in place for
and neither
50-50.
parent has custody.
Exactly.
What you're trying to say is that neither parent has custody. That doesn't preclude parental rights.
Because
Your
I will tell you this right now. I will tell you this. I know this from personal experience. In my case, one of the concerns we had was that my ex-wife was going to take my children to Ukraine. We were told, even though there was no custody set or anything, that there was nothing I could do. And I got this told by the State Department
I'm going to tell you that doesn't mean the State Department's correct.
that the Hague
Because I
Convention, because a judge has not adjudicated any sort of custody.
and hence why we are trying to make shared parenting 50-50 custody a
Exactly.
presumption because it's causing a problem that if you haven't even gotten the custody done. But that being said, Clint, if a parent were to take a child out of the country to another country, but the case still remained in the US, that point, a judge would be able to say, I am giving sole custody to the parent that is still in this country. Therefore, the other parent has now caused custodial interference. So, in essence, if a parent were to take the kids and kidnap them prior to a parenting, to a custodial plan or a custodial order being made, chances are that the presiding judge would probably have no choice but to award sole custody to the parent that was still in the country because the other parent failed to show up for court in another
Yeah.
country. Plus the fact that they
Yeah,
absconded
it's
with the
funny
children.
because when I looked this stuff up yesterday and everything, one of the questions I asked, well, what if a country doesn't participate in the Hague Convention? Because there are countries that are not
Yep.
partners in the Hague Convention. They're not signatories. And it says if a country is not part of the Hague Convention, there's no formal mechanism to compel the return of a child or resolve civil disputes. Parents must rely on strictly diplomatic efforts or private negotiations or the local court system of that country, which is unpredictable. So this is again, they don't
Yep.
have to bring these children back. It is hey, can you please help us out? This parent took the children, they're US citizens. But nowadays it's gotten even more complicated because most of the time, most countries now have dual nationality. So if
They're
like my
actually
sons have dual nationality in the US and in Ukraine.
there are
So they're
actually
citizens of
nine
both countries.
countries. There are actually 9 countries that do not except the Hague. India, China, Russia, most Middle Eastern countries, many African nations, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Thailand, and Vietnam.
It just adds another legal process to the nightmare that these children have to deal with.
Exactly. And this is something the court and why the judges and the courts absolutely need appropriate mental health training to understand the psychological trauma to a child who had a very positive, strong bond with the other parent and no longer sees them. It is devastating. That child doesn't
Well,
understand. They think that the other
one of the
parents abandoned them. They don't know.
one of the things that got me when I was doing the research was the simple fact of that even professional attorneys and judges and state advocates and stuff um, do not fully understand the paths that they have to follow when it comes to the Hague Convention for children abductions and stuff. They are
Yep.
still stumbling in the dark because it varies from country to country, from agency to agency. It may be just as simple as making a phone call on one end in one case, and then on the another case, you may have to send the special forces out to get something done. But I mean, you take it and you consider these children are now taken from what their norm is, from what they've known their whole life, to somewhere that's completely oblivious. It may not be a bad place, it may not be a good place, but it's that shift. Their normality has now shifted.
Yep. I'm working with the
And
case
then you
right
have
now that where the child was taken right when before the child was even born. The mother went to Puerto Rico and he
Mhm.
moved there, but the mother kept physically abusing him, hitting him, and he couldn't stay there because of the danger to his own self, and came back to the United States. And his daughter doesn't know, he's had on and off communications, but clearly the child has been told to be afraid of him, that he's scary, he's no good. And so she fluctuates. And now she's like 14, she's going into high school. She's lived in Puerto Rico all these years. How do you bring this child back into this country? The judge in Puerto Rico has said no, he is to have visitation, he is to see his child, blah, 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 blah. And mom keeps coming up and has been blocking. And so now the judge has made the order stronger. But how is there's a whole process of now getting this child oriented to a positive relationship with her father, being able to come to this country and not be afraid that she's not going to be able to go back to Puerto Rico, or deciding that she wants to stay in the United States. I've given him several options, which were, the kid is already hooked into Puerto Rico for 14 years of her life. So she's in the public school there. When she comes to the United States, there's nothing, she needs to work something out in the school system that when she is here in the US, she does her education virtually or homeschool. And so that she can
you,
keep up
it's funny.
and and then go back to Puerto Rico and still be on page with the rest of her class or her level. But
It's funny that you bring up Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is part of the United States.
yep. And
So
yet
why
it's
is there an issue there?
the child. Well, the problem was he went there, then had to leave, come back here, and has been fighting forever since to try and get himself back to maintain his relationship, which of course mother is blocked, and Puerto Rico says no, you can't do that. And so now they've ordered the child to visit the father, and the child's had some excuses, obviously parroting mom, but you get the point that even if this was another country, this is just another state of the US. How do you do this? You're going to do the look, you do this using homeschool method, a virtual school or virtual, so that, and we did this all through COVID, so there was no excuse telling me it can't be done, because we know it can be done. And you do this while, so that the child can now live in both states, if you will, or both countries, but still keep up with their work and still be able to maintain a relationship with both parents.
But see, here's another aspect happens. Does the Hague Convention apply then?
No, because Hague, oh, wait a second. The Hague, I assume, only applies from country to country, not state to state. State to state would be federal, would be the FBI, because it crosses over state lines.
State to state is interstate issues,
Right,
not international.
right.
So this issue of Puerto Rico, that's why I was bringing it up. This issue with Puerto Rico is an interstate issue, not an international issue. But it's funny because a lot of people do not technically consider Puerto Rico as part of the United States. but it is.
Yep.
It's how we view these things. Um, they are U.S. citizens. They have to abide by U.S. federal law. But yeah,
And
I mean,
interestingly,
back.
I just put that into an IAI chat and said there are high profile cases involving Puerto Rico and Florida that have received serious media
Mhm.
attention because of this issue.
Yeah, I mean,
Puerto Rico is a
let's look at,
territory.
but back to the thing. But let's go back to the question was, if the couple is not married and we'll use the maternal aspect of it, the mother decides to leave the country, what options does the father have at that point?
Wait a second. I just read something here. The Hague Convention applies whenever a child is wrongfully removed from one signatory country slash state and taken to another signatory country slash state. This includes cases between U.S. states, which are treated as separate entities under the convention, between the U.S. and other countries, and between any other pair of Hague signatories. So it's a much broader international kind of concept, not geographically limited, but
Yeah,
by region.
yeah.
Interesting. So technically, I guess because Puerto Rico is a territory rather than a state, it may kind of it doesn't fall that way. Um,
It may be the gray area in the viewing of it.
correct. This is
So that's
Hague is a very interesting element to these cases where a parent will abscond with a child or children. I want to say, what was it, about 5, 6 years ago, maybe a little longer, but 8 years ago, there was a woman from the East Coast, I want to say Maryland, Tennessee, somewhere there, who kidnapped the child to Europe. And the father spent 15 years looking for this kid. Finally found the kid. Mother was had and the U.S. had convicted her of kidnapping. They under that condition, they could Interpol got involved and make the mother come back to stand trial, and the child was
yep.
therefore then brought back. But the child by that point was, I think, an adult or almost
I
an
remember
adult.
that case. Yeah, the child was nearly aged out of the system at that point. Uh, but I mean, that's the thing is not to get off track of the subject matter, but the Hague Convention, for all general purposes, is basically just the ability to ask one of these countries, "Hey,
Can you
send
help
these
us out?
children back. Our
Yeah,
courts have jurisdiction." Yeah, and it's basically just an ask. That's all it is, really. They're not
and that's the
mandatory
problem.
to return these children.
Right. And that's where the Hague falls short, because it's not mandatory that the country that the person has absconded to has to be involved to return the child. They can get in it and say, hey, we're requesting that you return the child. We can't force you to do this, but we're advising you that this would be the right option to do. I would
Well,
suspect
the other
that
aspect of the
under the
Hague,
Hague, I would suspect though under the Hague that country may not be able to force it, but they would be able to allow an international organization from the from the country of origin to come in and pick up the children and take them.
well, see, I don't see that happening. I just for international law reasons. But one of the things that we have to understand is that the Hague Convention was written in 1980. This was
It's
right
outdated.
before the birth of the internet, but the birth of social media. So a
Yep.
lot of countries actually take this into account. Are these children able to communicate with the opposite parent through FaceTime, through phone call? All these aspects come into a case nowadays, and the courts aren't sure how to apply these new dimensions in this.
And not only
So
that,
there are a lot of people that have asked for an update to these conventions.
realize that just because a parent can FaceTime with the child, quite often that child's other parent is standing there in the room, providing no privacy for the child. So the child can't actually be and act themselves and have a healthy relationship with the other parent for fear of the parent they live with getting upset. Just because they have access doesn't mean it's a healthy access.
Well, let's look at the flip side of this coin. Let's say a parent who is a loving, caring parent takes the children to another country to protect them from an abusive or injuring parent. And the injuring parent uses the Hague Convention to bring the children back. This has
It
also
happens.
happened many times, as you know yourself. So, it's a catch-22 again on all these conventions.
Well, not only
You
that,
know,
but there's also the issue. You have to remember, there's also the issue that when we have a true abuse case, it's not being deemed a true abuse case. It's fallen through the cracks. Why has it fallen through the cracks? What evidence was missing to hold the abusive parent accountable? Or is it because the abusive parent has so much money they can buy everybody off? So there are other elements here that we have to we can't even account for that, or we have to account for it. But how do you even prove that? How you have to now you've got to be wealthy enough to hire a private investigator who finds out if somebody's been being paid off, or whether the reality is there wasn't enough evidence in the first place, or the evidence wasn't properly reviewed in the second place. All of this plays into this. So we're never going to say that abuse doesn't happen. We all know it does. The problem is when a parent takes that child and hides that child from the other parent on the premise of abuse that's never been founded, that's a problem for the parent who's taken the child. You need to be able to prove your case, and or the agencies need to be properly trained so they better understand and can recognize things and not get paid off.
yeah. Now, I'm going to interject here and just give this information out real quick. That if you are dealing with this sort of issue and you have not filed a Hague Convention filing, you can reach out to the U.S. government at 202-501-4444. That's their telephone number. Or you can email them at askci@state.gov. And you can go to the travel.state.gov website and then just click on child abduction. And they are 24 hours on this phone number. Now, I mentioned that because we're dealing with potential government shutdown. Our soldiers aren't getting paid. Our federal agencies are kind of in the wind. So just take into consideration that these are, federal employees, folks. So they may not be picking up the phone right now. But don't give up, because if I recall correctly, when I went to the website, there are forms you can fill out on the website itself and then submit them through email. And I'm pretty sure they have somebody monitoring that.
I would also suggest that if you do this and you submit a form online, or you make a phone call, or you send an email, please document it so you can prove the date that it was sent. Blind copy yourself so that so it sends you a copy of the email and you then save it so you can prove, I sent this on such and such date. Here is the proof. Here is the evidence. So they can't claim what's called statute of limitations.
And here's another aspect. What I like about this was another option for parents that I was informed on, was that if you do have concerns of the other parent possibly going to take your children and they apply for passports, you can actually contact the passports agencies and tell them, I have not given permission for my children to have passports. There's no custody arrangement, stuff like this. And there's a form you fill out, and I think it's $75 that you have to submit. But if your children's name pop up in the system, you will be alerted immediately that passports have been applied for through this person at this agency. And you can go to the court system, who's handling the case, who has jurisdiction over your case, show them this information, and they can halt it right then and there.
Correct. And this is good to know.
If there is a custody, if there is a custody arrangement, yeah. if there is a custody agreement in place, then it's a little harder, but you can still use that paperwork to get notified that passports have been applied for. You may not be able to halt it, but you can get notified at least and have that knowledge already.
Actually, if you have joint custody, must get a written permission from both parents for that child to leave the country.
Yeah, if you have joint custody, you still have to give permission, but the sole custody
It's
and the other
different.
parent has very limited. Yeah.
Yep. If it's sole custody, that is correct. You are very limited because that parent can do whatever they want unless there is something written in
Well,
your order that says you have, the other parent has sole physical custody, but you have medical, educational, religious, etc., other rights. Sometimes
exactly.
the courts, in some
It's
cases,
amazing to me.
sometimes the courts will actually order that all
Go ahead.
passports for the children be turned over to the courts or to an attorney.
In my experience with the parents I've spoken to in cases like that, only if the attorney or the parent requests the courts to do this will they do this anymore.
Right.
Because we've
Correct.
become such a international society. We don't think about the forethought, and we're talking, worst case scenarios here. But unfortunately, there are parents that deal with this aspect. I know one parent that they were married. She filed for divorce here in the United States before they even went to court. She took their child to Germany, and when the U.S. courts found out that she had moved back to Germany with her child, they said, "Well, you got to go to German court. He's a German citizen," because he had dual nationality. So the father flew to Germany. German courts heard it. She was given custody. He has to fly to Germany every year for 2 months to see his son.
Yeah.
And
See,
he's been fighting that battle for 9 years.
Yeah. And so by the time this kid he gets anywhere in the courts, the kid's going to age out of the system. And the sad part
Yeah.
is the minute she took that kid out of this country, he should have filed here in the US immediately for kidnapping because of some version, because he was still the parent. There was no custody. There was nothing else that had been done. And had
So was
gotten the order.
she. So was she.
Right. So, and therefore,
They just filed for divorce. They hadn't even gone to court yet and had their marriage hearing.
that still would
There are loopholes to all these legal aspects
it would seem to
that we
me that
talk
if they
about. There are
weren't
legal
even divorced,
loopholes.
it would seem to me that if they were still legally married and she took that kid to another country, that was still quantified as custodial interference because he still was a parent with custody, even though because there was no divorce. There was nothing on paper. She just picked up the kid. Otherwise, it would be too easy for anybody to just pick up kids and go. There has to be somewhere a stopgap to that.
You would imagine, but a lot of states don't have that because you're both the parents. You both have custody. You haven't even gone to a court system yet. So for the lack of a better term, where does the buck stop at?
Well, here's the thing. If they got married in this country, she can't get a divorce in Germany. She has to get a divorce in this country.
If I recall correctly, that used to be the thing. There's agreements between, I'm not 100% sure, so I'm not going to make a 100% sure comment, but I think there are applications that you can file to get a divorce in another country, if you're a citizen of that country.
I'm asking AI right now. Hang on. Let's see if it comes back with an answer. The complex question. Most countries recognize that divorce be granted in jurisdiction where either spouse has sufficient connection to that country. Common scenarios, jurisdiction. The country where the divorce is sought must have legal jurisdiction over the case. This usually requires the filing spouse to have lived there for a certain minimum period. Some countries also require the respondent spouse to be notified and given an opportunity to respond. Just because one country grants a divorce doesn't mean the other country will automatically recognize it. The U.S. may or may not recognize a divorce granted in another
Exactly.
country, depending on whether proper jurisdiction exercise. The fact that they started the divorce in the USA probably should have meant that she could not file anything in another country because it had already been
You would imagine. And it's
initiated here.
I relate that. I relate that to all these people going to Las Vegas, getting married and divorced or annulled down there. And even though they got married in different states, a lot of states won't recognize those annulment divorces out of Las Vegas. It just depends on the state.
Could
We
be. Well,
forget that
because,
there's
yeah.
we forget that there are no unilateral laws covering all 50 states. These are all independent aspects depending on what the state legislature has chosen.
And that is a major issue. It's like this goes back to the different names that we give to child protective services depending on what state you're living in. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
we need one term that is the same term used in all states and federally, because otherwise it complicates the matters and creates a burden on all of the systems to not be using the same terminology. And hence why shared parenting is so important. Because if you are married and you have children together, biologically, you are both parents. Biologically, you both have equal rights to everything. That doesn't mean that one parent can circumvent the rights of the other parent. And that then brings you back to the Constitution on parental rights, which a parent has parental rights under the Constitution of the United States, at least.
It's funny because I just asked Google, you use AI, I prefer Google. I said, is CPS or social services, child protective services, whatever, a federal agency? And this is the reply I got. It says, no, Child Protective Services, CPS, is not a single federal agency, but a state level function that receives federal funding and must follow federal law. Now, wouldn't that mean it's a federal agency that just works
I
under the state's umbrella?
Yeah, that seems like it would.
I mean,
I
let's call
just
a duck
lost,
a
yeah,
duck.
yeah. Okay, so I looked up parental rights in the U.S. Constitution. It's not specifically stated in there. Instead, it was developed through Supreme Court interpretations and case law over time. The parental rights are primarily derived from the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which protects fundamental rights. The Supreme Court has recognized parental rights as a fundamental liberty interest, meaning the government cannot interfere with parental decisions without compelling reason. There are 4 cases cited here: Meyer versus Nebraska, Pierce versus Society of Sisters, Wisconsin versus Yoda, and the one I know the most, Troxel versus Granville, which is a 2000 case. What this means,
I think Troxel is the most quoted case there is.
What this means is parents have broad constitutional protection to make decisions about their children's upbringing, including education, religious training, medical care, and general welfare. However, these rights are not unlimited. The state can intervene if a child's health, safety, or welfare is at risk, a parent is abusing or neglecting a child, other compelling state interests are involved. Limitation. Parents' rights can be restricted by
It's funny because
law when
the last thing you read
Go ahead.
is that state interest.
Important limitation. Parental rights can be restricted by law when child protection is at stake, which is why courts can override parental wishes in cases of abuse, neglect, or medical emergency. So your parental rights are covered
and yet we
under
have
Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment.
Yeah. But how many of these domestic relations courts violate these on a daily basis under their own guesswork? And the fact that even stated it, that they can intervene under state interests. A state is not part of that child's life.
Correct. And if they are going to be part of that child's life, then they can pay for that child. If you're going to claim
Exactly
that that if the state wants to claim that they can control the child, then you need to be paying for that child. Don't go telling the parent now that, oh, well, we're taking custody of your kid. Well, this just takes it into another level. We're going to take custody of your kid. Your kid's going to the foster abduction care and foster and adoption case. But we're going to demand you pay child support for that kid. I can't tell you how many parents caught in the child protective services have been gone after for child support.
Yeah. But I mean, we kind of got off subject of the Hague.
Right. But it's the point.
If you are dealing with a case like that, you really need to do your research on it and find an attorney who has experience with Hague cases, not just the closest local attorney, the cheapest attorney. Hague attorneys are not cheap because they have to deal with this so specifically. But if they have experience, that's the one you want to go with.
So
if a state agency ever tells you, if a state agent ever tells you don't need an attorney, get an attorney.
Also, remember that if you filed the case in your country of origin and file it against the ex right away, that child's gone, you don't know where they are, you immediately file a case in your country, file something in the courts where she has to, and you try to serve her, you have to make it a public announcement, and she doesn't show up in court, she's got a warrant out, or she or he will have a warrant out for their arrest. Now you've set it up already in the country of origin.
I find it interesting. Now, I'll probably edit this portion out. I might not. Is that every time we get into these discussions, you're always using the she aspect as the kidnapper.
That's why I corrected myself.
Is Joani a little biased here?
No, that's why I corrected myself. I said they or he. And part of the problem, Clint, is that most men do not kidnap their kids out of the country. It is mostly been, if we do the research, will be women, because some of them for true reasons of abuse. Okay, I get that. And because there is a network to help women who are, quote unquote, claiming they are being abused, there's a network that assists them in going underground to get the kids and themselves out of the state or the country. Men aren't so lucky to have that kind of resource that the women have. Now, I'm not saying that men don't do it. They definitely do.
But believe it or not, I just looked it up. Believe it or not, I just looked it up. More men than women abduct children to other countries.
Interesting, because I don't know if that's necessarily accurate. Because most of the cases that we
get, it says fathers are more likely. It says fathers are more likely to abduct children internationally. Research on parental abduction suggests that fathers constitute the largest group of abductors, followed by male partners. Mothers are often the abductors in other cases. Mothers and female relatives are more frequently the perpetrators in other types of child abduction cases, such as when fleeing domestic violence. There we got that DV word again. But yeah,
I've got a different answer. Hang on. This is why I said research on international child abductions shows some notable patterns, though it's important to approach this carefully. General findings. Studies indicate that mothers are statistically more likely to be involved in international child abductions in parental abduction cases. However, the reason and context matter significantly. So mothers are more likely to do it. Custody patterns, why mothers are more frequently involved. Historically and currently, mothers are more often granted primary custody, which means they have more opportunity and potentially more motivation to flee with children. Threat perception, relocation motivation, mothers may abduct to return to their home country or to escape situations they view as dangerous. Contact. So it depends on which AI program you're using. Says men, mine says
we've
women.
had that discussion in a previous episode,
which is interesting.
you really have to cover your bases in more than one spot when you do this research. And that's what, you do yours, I use mine, and then we nail it in the middle.
Yep.
Because I honestly think it doesn't, the gender aspect is what really muddies the water in a lot of these conversations that we have, because you're only dealing with the fact that you're dealing with parents and children. That's it. You
Well,
know,
here's something interesting. They're saying there's motivation differs. Abduction by mothers are often framed as protective measures, while abductions by fathers are more often characterized as custodial disputes. Reporting bias. The cases that became high profile or reached law enforcement may reflect reporting patterns rather than actual prevalence. And cultural factors. Different countries and cultures have
yep,
different custody norms and family dynamics that affect these patterns. So, all of this, we come back
yeah,
to that, it really doesn't matter who's doing it. Let's be real. It's like anybody, you want to claim domestic violence, it doesn't matter what gender's doing it. It's wrong. It is not okay, no matter what gender does it. And when we take the gender issue out of the equation,
exactly. I
we
mean,
can better solve for it.
and I think that is the largest, to me at least, when as much as we do research and we talk to parents, I think that is the biggest issue, is that the judicial system uses gender bias, whether for dad or mom, uh, in these cases, because we have societal norms that are still ingrained in our brains. Mom's the homemaker, daddy's the worker. But today it's not that way. They
Yep.
haven't adjusted for the societal shifts. I know
Not only
both
that,
parents work. I know the dad stays home. It's so many altercations. So get rid of the gender terminology in the legal cases.
yeah,
Parent and
and
child,
believe
parent
and
A and parent B.
And remember, a lot of your judges are upwards in age, though, and so they're still set in that old standards way of mothers versus fathers. If
Yeah,
these are genderless issues, and when you can take that adjective out or that adverb that relates to gender out, you are now dealing with the base. That base issue is where we should be working from. That it is wrong to smack a kid. It is wrong to handcuff somebody illegally. It is wrong to kidnap somebody. It is wrong to psychologically abuse somebody. It doesn't matter the gender. It's wrong categorically.
but that also applies in these cases we're talking about concerning the Hague, because every country has its own separate cultural norms. But if you even remove the gender nomenclatures in those cases, you're still dealing with the baseline of a parent and child. So it would make these decisions probably more streamlined in their findings.
Which brings us to, I read off that list of countries that don't participate in The Hague. I suspect that a lot of those countries, and I would say definitely when it comes to China, India, Africa, that these countries don't respect women's rights the way women's rights are respected in base Europe and USA and Canada, where women's rights are more equal to men's rights. So, like when we go into the UN and they're trying to claim that only men are abusers and that women don't abuse, etc., they're really not talking about the bulk of the countries that are part of the UN and the Hague. They're talking about the outliers, a small group of countries that don't have the same, let's put it, values and morals that the other countries have. They're not with the times, if you will.
Well, I mean that's all subjective and how you want to look at it. Because we got to remember, even the UN has very little power in these sort of matters. Uh, it's we have a society that has to go to these extremes, even to even for us to even have a show about this is baffling to me, because we consider ourselves such an advanced society nowadays, and we're still dealing with primal aspects of parenthood. You
Yep.
know, nobody's a perfect parent.
Well, that's,
You know,
you know,
there's no
that's my
handbook, there's
words.
no golden handbook.
Right.
Yeah, I know that, but there's no golden handbook on how to be the perfect parent and everything. You go by what your experience were from your parents, and you try to improve on that.
Well, it gets better
Uh,
than that. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. If there was, we wouldn't have all these self help resources. We'd have one called the perfect parent. In addition, even at the age of 100, you are learning to parent because 100 years ago, we did not parent our kids the way we parent today. And that
mhm.
is a large part of some of our laws and what's going on with the Hague and the UN. Things are not based on our modern society and the realistic stats and research and what is actually really going on today. You can't say that women aren't in the workforce and women don't get jobs and women don't have some of the top positions in many of these um you know elevated countries, if you will, whatever you want to call it, because that's not true anymore. Now, you want to say that happens in some of the other countries that maybe aren't part of the Hague or whatever. Okay, yes, but that doesn't mean that quantifies for the whole rest of the world.
That's the thing is we consider ourselves a global society now, but we still mentally put each of us in our little own box. The United States, Russia, Germany, France, we all still live in that little box.
We
Uh,
but a lot of those
and I think that,
countries are on the same page as far as women's rights, not necessarily men's rights, because right now that pendulum has swung very far and we're trying to swing it back. But the point is that the countries like the US, Canada, France, England, Spain, Portugal, a lot of these countries come a long way from where we were in the 1800s when women were.
well, I mean, that's the thing is, here's my, and this is probably going to upset some of our viewers or listeners. We have gone so far when we talk about women's rights, men's rights, voting rights. We've gone so far past the equality bar. Now it's again one-sided, and you have to shift it back, and nobody wants to shift it back because now you have more power. It needs to simply be basic human rights. What is fair for
Exactly.
everyone across the board?
What's the board? Exactly. But unfortunately
Get
there
rid
are
of women's
countries where
rights, get
this.
rid of men's rights.
Yep. It's human rights. And those human
Exactly,
rights should not be predicated on one sex, orientation, gender at all. It's human. So I think that's a great place for us to kind of end
here's,
on human rights
let
that
me
we.
state this before we do
Okay.
that, is look at our society now. We have accepted homosexuality as a norm. We've accepted, for the most part, transgender. And when we hear of somebody who is a homosexual wanting to adopt a child, we don't bat an eye about it anymore. Human right. These are individuals who want to love a child and raise that child in that loving environment, like any two normal parents, whether
Yep. Let's
female,
analogous
it's
this
the
to the
love that you give the child.
let's analogize this to Tarzan, who was raised by apes, or the kid that was
Exactly.
raised by wolves. Just because they're not the same mammal doesn't mean there wasn't a love by that parent that took on the job of raising that child.
No. Look at what happened a few years back when that child fell into the gorilla pit and the
Mm-hmm.
silverback came up, and they thought the silverback was going to hurt the child. Instead, that silverback, a primate who's considered not the greatest thinker, protected that child, took the child to the entrance so humans can get to it and help it. That's not out of spite or out of dumbness. That is pure instinct, parental instinct.
Yep. Parental
I
instinct.
think that's a good place to
Oh,
end it today.
yep. Parental instinct is a very strong one. So, ladies and
So go save a
gentlemen,
silverback.
yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, Clint and I would like to thank you for joining us on Family Justice Denied, and we look forward to another discussion. If you would like to send us your
And
ideas for any other topics that we can maybe discuss, please email us at familyjusticedenied@gmail.com.
and I will add in in the description all the contact information for the state agencies if you are dealing with a case that needs to get Hague involvement. So we're out.